The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar by solutionXchg. Our title today is Innovative Data Extracts in S/4HANA and ECC6, and we are very excited you could attend and hope that the topic is of interest to you and your organization. My name is Kristen Gerling, and I will be your host throughout the session. Up front, a few administrative items. The presentation will take about 45 minutes today, and we have 10 to 15 minutes reserved for questions at the end. We will conclude with a quick summary, and we'll spend some time answering all the questions that have come in during the time of the presentation. All participants are on mute during the full duration of the webinar. And please, again, post any questions or concerns through the questions function in your administration panel on the right side of your screen. If you cannot hear us or cannot see the presentation, please also do that through this question panel. We'll send out transcripts to those who are interested of the slides after the webinar. Please let us know through an email to info@solutionXchg.com. That is spelled info@solutionXchg.com. But then let's dive right into the topic. Our speaker today will be Mitchell Silverstein from our partner organization, Brandywine Data Management Solutions. Mitchell, do you want to give a quick introduction of yourself?
Well, just very briefly, as I'm showing here, we are primarily in the data management, data archiving, document management space. We have individually 20-ish years in SAP, some more, some a little less. And we have been working together with solutionXchg since its inception and actually prior to that. So I'll move on from there. Anything further you wanted to add, Kristen?
No, just a few words on solutionXchg. We are a company bringing highly innovative solutions to the American market with more than 20 years of consulting experience. Our main focus is a content server solution by KGS and also a write once, read many compliant storage solution by Eternity. And with that, I turn it back over to Mitchell for the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen. This is a follow-on session to one that we had earlier in the series that focused largely on tax and legal audit scenarios. So we'll still cover some of that, as well as try to get a bit further to the lower section about extended scenarios and use cases for data extraction. The main focus, if we look at the tax audit scenario, is the accuracy of getting content out of the system. The second most important is that in that situation, the most important is to provide external access to that content so that the system of record is not subject to the prying eyes of the auditors and tax authorities, but rather provide a mechanism for providing selective content in an external fashion, which we'll describe a little bit further. And also to note that we're focused not only on data, but also supporting documents as well, where those are directly relevant. So in that scenario, vendor invoices are often of interest to support tax audits, but not exclusively. There are other situations as well and mechanisms for performing those tasks. Some examples of extended scenarios or use cases beyond that, for which there are some innovative capabilities, are internal and external audit. Internal audit including when systems are open for change, managing that, what users are doing or not doing properly, how to provide access to the tables that record that in SAP, or even turning on recording of that content in SAP. Legal discovery is a standalone scenario that comes into play, and compliance, an example of that being providing information to the FDA regarding, for example, the approval process for shipments of controlled substances. That's an example that can be required on an ongoing basis in certain scenarios, and ways to both automate that and make sure that the content is correct. In the merger and acquisition scenarios, that can be one of two directions. One is providing the capability to see content from a company or a subset of a company that has been acquired. That's one challenge. The other is how to provide content out of an existing system of your own to an acquiring company, and potentially removing that content subsequently. That's a challenge all unto itself. And then legacy decommissioning, in this case, we're referring primarily to an SAP system that could be in a greenfield migration from ECC to S4, or it could be in a multi-production system environment that is being consolidated. So we'll move on to a bit more of considerations of what can be important in deciding what tools and methods might be appropriate, where complexities come into play, and answering some of the three big questions on the right side about what should be extracted, when's the best time to do it, and then not only how much content there may be as a result of that, how much it may cost directly, indirectly. So from a scope of extraction perspective, again, initially we'll be looking at this from a text-like perspective, but it will, as you'll see, broaden out very quickly. US only or multinational can be a significant difference. If there are 4 company codes in the SAP system that are all US, that's a much different demand than if there are 200 plus company codes in 30 plus countries. The requirements and defining what those are is a big challenge, but they definitely will vary dramatically between what will satisfy the IRS for US, what will satisfy French tax authorities, not only what, but when. The timing aspect is important, not just when to deliver the content as to when it's demanded, but also based on the nature of the system. Most systems that are older than 3 years old have data archiving live. There are some systems we've experienced that are older than 20 years that have no data archiving, but for the most part, best practices would dictate that transactional data older than 2 or 3 years typically is moved to the archive for the rest of its useful life. And therefore, there's a challenge in providing access to that post-archived content, no longer in the online tables. The second aspect of timing or frequency is whether the requirements are known well in advance, which could be the case for a traditional IRS type audit, or whether it's an on-demand type of requirement, which many countries have implemented recently. And as well, the on-demand aspect will come into play with determining exactly what should be extracted as well, since what is required can change over time. So trying to determine 7 years ahead of time what will be subject to audit is a best guess type of situation. Having the ability to provide an on-demand, on-request type solution tends to be much more satisfying. Then the volume of data will also potentially affect the tool set that may be relevant, whether it's a half a terabyte database or a 40 terabyte database can make a difference, not only how long the process may take calendar-wise, clock-wise, but also some tools are more flexible with regard to handling high volumes of data in shorter periods of time than others. The indirect versus direct cost referenced here is that some solutions, such as standard SAP, may be quote unquote free, but may have a higher implementation cost than add-on third-party products. And we'll take a look at some of each of those. So in the scope situation, again, I'll try to go through fairly quickly with regard to the tax and audit and move on to others. But the main considerations in today's world are US has not changed drastically in the last 20 years. The IRS requirements are fairly consistent from year to year that we've seen. And the only variation in that tends to be some specific tables and fields that may become relevant over time. But the general concept of a trial balance to the detail and then related documents has not really fundamentally changed in a significant period of time. The multinational situation, on the other hand, is fairly quickly evolving. Portugal was one of the early required countries for the SAFT concept, which is not only a different set of content than the IRS specific extracts, but also a different file format, mandatory, and also requires in some cases external content that may not be in the SAP system at all. And likewise, even though additional countries are coming on board over time to have a SAFT type requirement, such as Spain recently, Luxembourg, and so forth, each of their requirements, although named the same, is different in its implementation. So it's similar yet different, and there are challenges of using standard SAP solutions for those. France went a slightly different direction, but also has its own unique requirements as well. So just a bit on scope and data, and this is a little bit of a technical view for those that are familiar with how an SAP database is composed of primary tables from a transactional perspective, related tables, master data, and so forth. In this case, from a tax audit perspective, the center of the universe tends to be the financial postings and then everything related to it. So in an SAP standard solution, such as the data retention tool, which we'll look at a little bit further in a moment, it tends to look at a period of time, the main financial postings, related documents that may help support why the posting occurred, and only that supporting document set is optionally included in what is provided to the tax authorities. Sometimes that's sufficient, and sometimes that's not quite the right paradigm. So we'll take a look at some alternatives to that in a moment and see how the extraction process works. But the main concept is identifying the requirements either provided explicitly or implicitly and determining which tool sets can provide that content in the most accurate way, the secure way, and in a way that will be repeatable year over year as required. What's common to different solutions is having some mechanism for determining the accuracy of what's in the SAP database relative to what is extracted from it for a particular requirement set. That's one reason to have mechanisms such as this for looking at key tables, such as the financial header table in this case, or could be line items equivalently, and breaking it out not only by the number of documents for a given year, but also to look at the composite view of the country assignments, how many countries are involved, how many company codes within a country, and that can help to not only use this for control counts to look at the end result of the process to make sure it's accurate, but also to devise the scheme in the first place, saying what is the right tool for me if there's activity in Portugal, which is a specialized solution, in France, which is specialized, multiple countries that are non-US like, and as well to see if the preponderance of the volume is US or foreign can also affect some decisions around extract methods, timing, and when the extracts should occur as well. A little bit about the online versus archive world. As I mentioned before, one of our focus areas is on the data archiving space, and therefore the determination about what to keep online, what to keep available but in an archive is an important concept in general, and it's important to the selection of the right tool set or the right flexible tool set for data extraction as well. In this particular depiction, the general notion is that from time of creation till the time of useful life to the time of the mandatory destruction if one honors the retention guidelines within the company is typically a 0 to 7 year, at most US based, or 10-year, most commonly in European countries for transactional data, but some different types of transactional data can have shorter online retention times as well. The main notion is, though, that no matter where the content happens to be in the timeline, whether it's in the first year of its useful life or near the last year of its useful life for obscure purposes, occasional purposes, such as an audit after year 6, but before destruction, there has to be a way to not only get that content discretely from where it might exist, whether it's in the online tables or in an archive, but also to make that fairly transparent to the recipient so that the consolidated view of activity from 2012, whether it's still living in the online system in part because it was non-archivable, 99% maybe in the archive, but 100% has to be delivered to support the audit successfully or any other extraction request. And therefore, tools need to be flexible enough to be able to bring those pieces together and not make a distinction between where they were living or have any alteration between how they looked online and how they looked from the archive. So that's the main purpose of this from an extraction model perspective. There are little blips over periods of time that are more of the typical online use, of which audit UC is one of those. The legal compliance requirements can be another one of those within the useful life. But again, many of those are well beyond the typical online time frame, and therefore SAP standard extraction from tables is not sufficient to satisfy that type of an extract request. The volume of data issue, the main aspect of those, as I've mentioned a little bit before, is how long is it going to take to perform extracts? Again, in a financial audit situation for a 1 terabyte, fairly small database, that can be a matter of days or weeks at most. In a 40 terabyte situation where every period could be 30 million header records and 200 million line items and related documents, millions of sales orders, that can take months of a given year to perform a year's worth of extracts potentially, taking into account that you can't run X 24/7 in a production system. So that's why there is seasonality when extracts are commonly performed, but on demand will come into play as well. And also there are other physical resource issues that can come up with regard to generating large extract files, and the fact you have a 40 terabyte database is going to create a multi-terabyte extract file set that has to live somewhere, and that's not always readily available without proper planning. The cost, as I referenced before, free, SAP standard isn't always free at the end of the day when looking at the total implementation cost, so that will be balanced. Also, the extent to which change management comes into play is not a small cost over time. So even though SAP standard tools like the data retention tool may be standard in the system, there are SAP notes that come and go fairly frequently in that area, and that can be considerable depending on where your starting point is. So we've seen situations where just the change management aspect can take up to a month of time and a significant amount of dollars just to get a system to the right level and getting everything in place. Support notes are part of the issue. Support pack upgrades can also then complicate factors. So having a prepackaged solution sometimes is more expedient than going with a built-in solution, as it were. Not always, but again, it depends on the situation. Time to deployment can be relevant as well, because there are times when you're starting with nothing and you have 30 days to answer the first time a request from a new country, for example. The ability to roll out a complicated solution versus a simple installation can sometimes influence which is the right solution in that case as well. Right, a couple of the different methods, and by nature of their methods, different paradigms with regard to how the extraction model works are listed below, and I'll go through a couple examples of each of these briefly. But going from some of the simplest to complex, and I've thrown in a couple innovations as well. The very basic, simple approach for a very small system used to be, back long ago, just run standard reports, run lists of tables, send them out to files and pass them along to the requesting parties. And that's technically possible, but it has some significant downsides. We'll go through some of the pros and cons of these shortly. That's still possible when you get into the aspect of having archiving live in a system. Then transactional reporting and list functions tend to start to have issues because they're mostly focused on reporting against only the online content and not the totality of online plus archive content. So from the innovation perspective, it's possible to archive enable existing reports if they're not already designed that way, which most of them are not. And it's less possible, but to extend standard list functions, it's possible to create a list from the online table, a list from the archives, merge them together. You can see how that can create complications and problems down the road. And then the next one is BW reporting. We'll show a solution on getting documents out of the system en masse where there's a requirement to do so. The data retention tool from SAP, a way to extend that tool from PBS, and some other solutions that PBS provides as well to provide extracts out of the online system into either flat files or other databases. And then TJC, a French partner company, has an audit extraction cockpit tool, which we'll look at as well, which is designed not only for financial audits, but can do more of the other extended scenarios as well, which include not only the multinational solutions, but also the legal compliance extracts and the other extended scenarios that we spoke about earlier. Again, the main mission in trying to determine what the best fit is, and sometimes it's a combination of them, is looking at the totality of what needs to be extracted and when, and by what method, how much, how large. Those will all come together, and ultimately there will be a best fit for any situation. So just quickly here on online transactions reports, beyond what I mentioned about potentially extending custom reports or even SAP standard reports in some cases to see online and archive data. When we looked at the traditional model of financial audits, as I mentioned early on, trial balances and out to the details is the common place to start when we look at the center of the universe, and then it can go any number of directions after that. Requirements can include the master data, such as describing what the accounts are, the company code, descriptions, the country assignments, and so forth. And starting to build out, that tends to show that trying to do single table lists or small numbers of reports out to a file tends to not be a very satisfying way to solve it. It can be used to reconcile what an extract tool is providing to you, more so than being the tool itself. So for example, looking at a trial balance online, comparing to the balance records that came out through an extract process is very useful, but performing a trial balance report and handing it to a tax authority tends not to be. BW reporting, in some cases, especially large systems, has been at times thought to be a solution because all the data is already in BW because it was in SAP once, in ECC. It was extracted out for high volume reporting at one point in time, and sometimes it's still there, but frequently BW doesn't keep everything for the full retention time frame as mandated by the tax authorities. So for BW reporting, if it keeps all the data for 5 years, that doesn't help you if you need tax reporting for years 6, 5, and 4, for example. So that's one aspect of it. The other relevant item is that because BW is really a secondary repository, it's not the system of record, it's not widely recognized as a good and proper data source in the first place. And then aggregation of content, because extraction is sometimes one-to-one, but sometimes extraction also manipulates content, is a reason to generally avoid using BW as a data source for most types of extracts where the system of record can be used instead. I mentioned before about documents as being, in some cases, almost as important as the data, or in some cases, the only request that's made for mass extraction. In many cases, many customers have a solution that I'm showing here, which is, it's labeled Document Access by OpenText by SAP. It's also been called DocuLink for the last 20 years from OpenText. Sometimes that's bundled together in many delivered systems, whether it's used or not. And its normal purpose is to provide either customer or vendor folders and allowing access to the supporting documents that are below it. That's its primary mission. But depending on how it's designed, it can also be run to show all of the activity for all vendors for a month or a year at a time. That can be a very large list and a large list of supporting attachments. But the challenge then is, how do you get it from seeing one at a time on the screen and saving it times 20,000 as local files versus doing a mass download? So what I'm just showing here is one of the creative, innovative techniques that we've used for several customers, which is built into this tool. There is a way to extend mass processing, so you could mark all the documents of a result list, every document on this list if desired, from the customer side or supplier side, or selectively select once to say download everything. Out of the box, it's not designed to download everything, but it's fairly easily extensible with some code that we've developed to process those in a special way. So they'll be saved individually with proper naming to a destination of choice. And that's one way to use a common existing interface to provide on the back end a large data store of collective PDFs and Word documents and other supporting documents. So it's not for everyone, because not everyone has this type of tool built in. It's not standard SAP, but again, it's not uncommon to have, and it's easily extendable, even though it's not advertised as such per se. So that's a little project to make happen, but it's easily done, days, not weeks or months or years. There are other third-party tools that can be plugged in to provide document downloads as well, if that is necessary. All right, the SAP data retention tool as a framework, I'm not going to belabor the point about this, although for some customers who've never performed large financial document extracts ever, it could be considered innovative. To me, it's standard and has its pluses and minuses, which we'll see shortly. But we'll use it as a framework because everything else that exists that does aspects of these differently or better still can be used as a contrast point. So for those that are new to Dart, we could certainly have a one-on-one specifically about what a Dart implementation would look like in a given implementation. So I won't belabor the point here, as I said, but some of the common aspects of it, some of which you'll see from before, the aspects about how it deals with scope and how it deals with the timing are the most important aspects that will be differentiators between the Dart tool and what we'll see after that. So the Dart tool is designed as a predefined set of tables and fields to be extracted largely from a US or German perspective and can be used for multinational situations, but its origins are from a US and German specific situation, and it's been maintained that way over the years. The complications come into play because of the number of legal entities that may exist in a given implementation. If it's 4, and it's all US, it's easy. If it's 200 across the 30 countries, as I described before, it can be a very laborious process. And then the worst aspect of it, if you will, is that if you're performing this well in advance of archiving, again, perform it 3 months after the year closes and before archiving has occurred, because you want all the data to be online. That's its main focus, is seeing online content. You're still making a best guess not only of what's relevant for a future audit, but you also can't go back later and get additional fields or tables that may be necessary when the audit actually occurs. So the best guess notion is really the most limiting factor of this, and that's both because of the timing. The timing is because it only sees online content for the most part. There's a small exception for actually seeing and extracting some elements of archive content, but not very flexibly, and we'll see an example of that shortly. So therefore, the other notion about the cost being free, yes, it's standard SAP. It's delivered with every modern ECC system and S/4HANA as well, for that matter. But the cost to extend it to see additional fields and tables requires not only extending technical structure definitions, but also tends to include custom coding, and that's on the back-end side to get the content out, and then there are some complications on seeing what's been extracted or limiting what was extracted to deliver to tax authorities as well. So that's the question marks next to the cost. So without going into great detail, the 3 main activities here are determining what should be extracted, whether it's just what has been predefined from the very beginning and delivered, which is rarely the case, or trying to determine how to extend and what to extend. Then performing the extraction against the transactional data, master data, as one large bundle, which, as indicated before, can take weeks or months depending on the underlying database and its size. And then the third step is actually limiting what's delivered to the requesting authorities in the first place, because the extract I call a superset of data that might be necessary to provide, and then the views are reports that are filtering down not only based on time, but also based on specific fields of interest and specific subsets of companies or vendors, if necessary, or company codes to provide the actual deliverable file. So it's a multi-step approach, and still, if this is done well in advance, it's a much larger superset of data than may ever be needed, and may not even be all the fields that are needed when the time comes. For 80% of the world, Dart works fine. So I'm not trying to disparage and say it can never be used, because it certainly is, but there are certainly limitations, especially as one's needs are more complex. And its main focus is on not only the financial center of the universe, limiting what it extracts in the first place, but also that is its only focus. So it's not designed for operational content and not designed for any Z table on demand or anything of that sort. Okay, so all I'm showing here is that there are predefined tables and fields, and that's what you get out of the box. It's 4,000 plus fields, which sounds like a lot, but when you look at actual requirements from the IRS and say we want one more field than on this list, it becomes a not out of the box solution. So it can have complications over time. The extract process, just conceptually, is tell me a legal entity or multiple ones, tell me a time frame, a year at a time or most. If it's a large enough situation, you can only do one period at a time. The example I gave before about 30 million headers and 200 million plus line items means that it's practically can only run in production a period at a time. That may take 2 days to get one period, 1 month's worth of data, just based on past experience, to get that data and reference documents out of the system. And it's a very large and bulky result accordingly. So a solution that can let you be a little more refined, saying I need 116 fields out of a very obscure table, just show me the 6 I was asked for, will make the extract much smaller, much faster, much more flexible, and doesn't need to be done years in advance. I'm getting ahead of myself on the story, but that's really one of the contrast points. The other aspect is this is designed for largely online content only, with some exceptions for some backfilling of archive content with extra steps. So two main steps, and we'll move on from here. The reporting step, again, is the third step on the prior slides, which is after you decide what to extract and you've run the extracts, very large, very long running, you still have long running reports that have to go through that voluminous extract and boil it down to specific content even smaller. So especially if you have a GL account specific report and you want to do the trial balance across all GL accounts first, that's fine. That's relatively fast. When you want all the detail for all the GL accounts, that's very large and very slow. And then when you want to run specific GL accounts identified for further sampling by tax authorities, which is the iterative approach that most audits go through, that can be, again, another fairly voluminous, long-running process. It can do it. It's not always the most flexible to provide that. And the file formats that Dart can provide are somewhat limited as well. So there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. For those that have gone through business school, you've probably seen that. And that's the main purpose there, is free, but not always. And there are a couple notes about how Dart migrates from the ECC concept into the S/4HANA concept. One is it runs exactly like it used to in HANA, partly because it can see ECC tables through the compatibility views of S/4HANA. You can also see native S/4HANA tables where that's relevant. So it's backward compatible and forward compatible by design. Again, it still will have some of those other limitations as mentioned before. So again, the strengths and weaknesses aspects, the largest is that it's familiar to existing auditors and it has a fairly high adoption rate still among active SAP implementations, but that 10 to 20% is, I would say it's growing a bit, partly because of some of the downsides to what Dart doesn't do quite as well. The best guess being the biggest issue around that, the high volume, multi-step processing, and the runtimes for that can be the secondary aspect. And then when you get to how do you deal with Portugal requirements and French requirements and Spain requirements and others, that in an SAP delivered solution set is a bit more complicated, to say the least. The Portugal one is evolved from a Dart-based solution to a standalone programmatic solution, and has been evolving for the last 9 years now. And France is a set of views that are inside of Dart. Spain is, again, its own little solution. So it's not all are solved from one core methodology. Each of those tends to have its own solution set and its own implementation method, and that can sometimes be a bit complicating down the road. Right, the PBS archive add-on CDART. PBS is a German company that's primarily delivering extensions to archive-enable online transactions, but it also has provided a tool set to allow a Dart extract program, or one that's very similar to it, to see archive data as well and make a Dart extract whole, whereas the standard Dart tool can only see, practically speaking, the online content without extra severe limitations. So in a very simple case where Dart seems to be the right tool, other than the fact that it was not implemented before archiving happened, either it's implemented after the fact or on an ongoing basis, archiving is very aggressive because of performance issues or database size issues, then this plugin or add-on would be a good fit in that situation. We've seen it be a good fit in a few situations, but all it does is add the archive enabling aspect to the standard Dart methodology. It doesn't really provide for improved runtimes or any issues such as that, or allow for ease of use for having less fields and less volume if that's the only request you have. And again, it's still based on the central Dart paradigm of FI postings first and all related documents and operational data second, if at all. All right, so that's really fundamentally, that's all it's doing is turn it on, run it instead of standard Dart, you get the same content, extracts out, and then you run standard Dart views to get the filtered content to pass on to tax authorities. And I've pretty well reviewed the strengths and weaknesses as I went along, so I'll move along from there. What I will just mention at the bottom here, the supplemental information about additional PBS modules. There is an enterprise content store application, which is a full system extract into a SQL Server database. So it is a solution potentially for decommissioning in certain situations. And likewise for high volume exports, if you're already using the add-ons in the system, the PBS add-ons to archive enable transactions, there is in the utilities area a way to do mass data volume exports from existing archive content, whereas otherwise it would be typically a very complicated process to do. So those are two options that are available as well in certain circumstances. For the Audit Extraction Cockpit from TJC, the scenarios it deals with is not only the Dart-like scenario with a different paradigm of on-demand, whenever you want, online and archive data equally available. It also will easily deal with the compliance solution or requirement, as I mentioned before, for example, the FDA requirement for periodic or daily output of approvals for shipments of certain controlled substances and so forth, and also has a full table master data decommissioning option as well to provide for access to all content of an existing SAP system delivered to a flat file structure outside of that system to allow it to be retired or imported into other systems or other databases. So most of the scope, timing, cost concepts are here as a parallel to how Dart was described, but the biggest differentiators here, noting the time, is again the fact that it's going to be not dependent on whether the content is living in the online system or in the archive. It can see both with an easy checkbox, no extra coding required, no extra indexing required, and also the fact that it has a framework built in to allow solutions for SAP for Portugal and other countries. It's an add-on to the same framework, but it doesn't require extra extractions or other methodologies, and a specialized solution for France, especially with them being a French company. They have a tight solution that also uses the same extraction framework, but has a standalone reporting framework that provides the proper output formats, proper fields, and allows for merging of external content that the FEC requirement dictates. All right, the process as it runs, it's not exactly the same flow as Dart, but the same determination is on demand, determining just what's required, meaning it may be a small number of tables, a small number of fields, no need to extract from hundreds of tables and thousands of fields as predefined Dart would, and therefore it's much smaller and therefore much faster to get. And because it can see online and archive data at the same time, it can be done on demand, not in advance of archiving, not years ahead of time, but just when the request comes through. It's also designed to be self-sufficient. So the user interface is simple enough to say, I want to pick this content, create output files, and it's really not a very complicated process. There's no coding in the middle that has to be seen by anyone, and no exceptions. It's really pick and choose, run, and deliver. It doesn't look fundamentally, conceptually different than any other standard SAP solution because it's an SAP add-on, certified add-on. So it's again, instead of predefined fields that it's all or nothing on the Dart solution, it's pick the fields that are of interest, only the ones that you want on the left side, leave everything on the right behind. So it's therefore much more compact. And also any fields that are available in the online tables available to the solution. In the Dart world, it requires custom structure definitions, custom coding to allow any extra fields that are not predefined to be available for selection and extraction. So that's one of its primary strengths. Again, there's a selection that says pick a period of time, one or multiple company codes, and create a smaller extract file set from the online and the archive at the same time for that period of time on demand. And then that's really what this is highlighting, is just reinforcing that picking from the archive can be no more complicated than saying, yes, I want everything from both possible data sources, and that's usually the safer choice unless you're trying to extract something that you know has never been archived. And then because it has built-in additional output file formats, it's more flexible than the Dart tool as well. So in this case, I tend to use a tab separated output, which is not available from standard Dart at all, or you can define your own delimiters depending on the particular recipient and the requirements. And depending on country requirements, you can change formats of dates and other output formats as well as you go. The next aspect of that, the next level down from that, instead of doing an extract a file, is one of the additional strengths of this tool is instead of extracting to a flat file where what you ask for is what you get, which may be all that's needed, there's also the ability to extract not only in a Dart equivalent data set fashion to say, I want everything that Dart generally asks for because that's what the auditors are used for, but I don't want to have to build that out manually. All that's predefined here, but also it can extract into intermediate tables where additional processing can happen before the final files are output. So the benefits of that are in certain specialized cases where, for example, the add-on solutions I showed you before with regard to France and Portugal and Spain, SAFT and FEC, can use an intermediate process where the extract process is identical to any other company code to create the output, the intermediate output, and then the specific output formats that are required for specific countries can then be massaged and filtered out in the secondary step. So that's what this is designed to do, is not only extract all the same tables or a subset thereof that Dart will as a starting point as opposed to building out from zero, but also to allow for subsequent manipulation of the data as well. There are special cases I'm working on in another situation where certain content is not coming from a transparent table. For example, change document content, and is one situation where it's not just text readable format in a field, but has to be massaged to make it usable, to align with line items and to see it in its proper context. And by doing an extraction to a table and then a secondary manipulation allows for the output to be exactly as you want to see it. So I won't go through the individual tables, but generally speaking, this could be used as a Dart equivalent tool, and that's why this aspect was designed to say, if you like what Dart generally does, but want the on-demand online plus archive content, meaning less content, and when you need it, not years in advance, and not worrying about archiving, this capability provides the equivalent of what Dart does, but with the benefits as well. So that's what this is designed to show as an alternative to the initial direct to file option. And most of these strengths I've already highlighted, but I've highlighted them here as well. Flexible and dynamic selection, archive enabled, on demand, and multiple multinational solutions that are what I would consider more solid and more flexible than those that SAP has delivered that either sits on top of Dart or standalone from Dart, even worse. All right, and then just to extend that concept one step further, as I've mentioned before, if you can extract financial data with the AEC tool, there's no reason why it can't do all tables and all fields, and there is a template approach to doing that as well, as opposed to using the FI-centric tax audit extract. It can decommission all content from an existing SAP system. That's the transactional data, the master data. There are certain control tables that are necessary to put those pieces back together later, and those are all extracted out together in one collective operation, not one process run, but ultimately it's one consolidated output in one known format that can be used later. And then M&A, merger acquisitions, are really a subset of decommissioning in my mind, which is you need a selected slice out of a system. Some of that's easy because it might be company code specific. Some of that is a little bit more complicated because not all data tables have a company code assignment to them. So there's some interpolation that's required to say, this is what I bought, and therefore I want as a file to be delivered to me or to send out to someone else. But the same tool set is designed to do both of those. And as well, in a companion product as a supporting tool is mass extraction of attachments as well. So as I showed previously, that OpenText provides a tool like that. If you have it, you can extend that. There's a standalone tool that provides for high volume extraction of all related PDFs and so forth, which will support a decommissioning or a tax audit scenario as well. So Kristen, I think you're coming back on to help us wrap up. Okay. And I think we're at the end because I pretty well have done the comparative analysis at the end. Again, the bottom line is we're not trying to sell products per se, we're trying to sell the best fit. What is the best fit? What is the best solution? And everyone's circumstance differs. Many are the same, but everyone has its unique qualities to it, and we'll be glad to entertain questions or follow-ups to help solve any particular situations. With that, back to you, Kristen.
Okay, thank you, Mitchell. That concludes the presentation section of our webinar today, and we're now switching over to a questions and answers portion. If you haven't done so, please post your questions on the question panel on the right side of the screen. I have one question that came in, and that is if you could describe the business use cases of the AEC tool one more time.
The use cases of the AEC, being that it's what I would consider a generic design for financial audit and tax audit extraction, but it's generic enough that any table is available for extraction, any fields within any tables. Those again are SAP standard or custom, means it's a good fit not only for the Dart equivalent type of tax scenario, but also for a legal hold type or legal request for all activity for a given material and customer combination. It's can be shaped to fit the scenario as well for the compliance situation, FDA or other compliance. Essentially, any table content that exists in SAP is already accessible, whether it's in the online tables or in the archive or both, to the AEC tool. So the fact that its audit origins are from a tax perspective and trying to be a better solution for Dart and on demand is not at all limiting to what it can see and what it can touch. Not only because of the breadth and depth of what it can see, but also the fact that it has the variability of the output formats as well. Not only the AIS, or the Audit Information System format, which has built-in headers and fields and controls around it, but also because it has essentially user-definable on-the-fly delimiters about the output formats as well. And it also separates files by size, numbers them and names them as you would like them, and lets you organize them in ways that are simpler than most, as well as you can either send them out to a server-side storage destination. You can also use a built-in tool to copy them locally where necessary, or to store them in an archive server for long-term storage as well. Those are all standard functionality within the tool.
Okay, and just a question from me. This is also S/4HANA relevant, right?
Correct. AEC is certified for S/4HANA, so not only can it use compatibility views to do similar extractions as what it may have been used for in ECC, but also can look at the HANA database table structures and perform extractions from there as well. Again, in simple finance, quote unquote simple finance, where the table structures are not only broader but deeper, you can still add the constraints around it to get the equivalent results, or any content that's desired can be extracted with this method as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mitchell. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar today, and I hope you got some good takeaways. Until next time, we say goodbye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.